Chapter 19. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed. Although these 3 days weren't long, it allowed Xianxia to familiarize himself with the living environment of the academy. In these 3 days, Xianxia didn't go to the academy other than the first day of classes. He was either cultivating in his room or immersing himself in the academy's library. This was because the classes taught by the teachers in the academy were nothing more than teaching everyone how to behave, how to deal with dangerous situations, survival skills in the wild, and combat techniques. These things were completely useless to Xianxia. In his previous life, he was a veteran. With his experience, he could teach those teachers. As for the combat experience and survival skills in the wild, in Xianxia's opinion, he was completely qualified to teach those teachers in the academy. This was because the knowledge that the teachers taught about combat was very shallow and far inferior to his own. The next morning, Xianxia put on the academy's uniform. After eating breakfast in the cafeteria, he walked straight to the library. The academy wasn't strict with the students. The daily classes were completely up to one's choice. After all, some of the students who were born in noble families and wealthy families had received education from their families. The knowledge they knew wasn't necessarily worse than some of the academy's teachers. It was just that they lacked experience. Therefore, the academy's classes were mostly prepared for the commoners. There were very few noble students who went to the academy for classes. Even if there were, they were mostly some small nobles. Arriving at the first floor of the library, Xianxia took a few books and walked to a table in the reading area. He sat down and read with great interest. The library of Kargath Academy was very large. The collection of books inside was also very plentiful. It covered almost all kinds of things. It was far more abundant than the library of Changyang Prefecture. Here, Xianxia found many books that weren't available in Changyang Prefecture's library. This allowed him to understand the situation of this world better. Currently, Xianxia was holding a book that introduced the various kinds of magical beasts on the Tianyuan continent. There were many kinds of magical beasts on the Tianyuan continent. Whether it was those that ran on the ground or those that flew in the sky, there were thousands of species. Moreover, the book mentioned that there were many kinds of magical beasts on the Tianyuan continent that weren't available in the book. These magical beasts either lived in the depths of the magical beast mountain range or far away in the endless sea. These places were difficult for even the most powerful experts to set foot in. Just as Xianxia was immersed in reading, a girl around 16 or 17 years old suddenly walked in from the entrance of the library. The girl was very beautiful. She wore the uniform of the academy. Her soft long hair was tied into dozens of small ponytails that fell down her back. It added a bit of beauty to her already pretty face. However, there was always a trace of arrogance on her face. It was obvious that she was born in a noble family. This girl was Cadiculi of the Cadiculi family. Cadiculi entered the library and walked straight to the bookshelves. Her eyes casually swept over the students sitting in the reading area. However, just as her eyes passed over the back of Xianxia, who was sitting at a table and reading in his uniform, her footsteps suddenly came to a halt. Cadiculi stared closely at Xianxia's back. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. When she thought of how Xianxia grabbed her leg and threw her off the stage a few days ago, her eyes immediately filled with anger. To her, this was an unforgettable humiliation. Her white and tender little face was flushed red from excessive anger. She snorted softly and was no longer in the mood to read. She directly left the library and muttered with gritted teeth, "Chiang Shoten, this time I'll definitely teach you a lesson." Right now, Xianxia's mind was completely absorbed by the contents of the book. He was very engrossed in reading and did not notice Cadiculi's arrival at all. In the academy's library, no one dared to cause trouble, so Xianxia was not on guard against his surroundings. After Cadiculi left the library, she went straight to find her second brother, Changyang-ku. At this moment, Changyang-ku was practicing alone in the forest behind the dormitory. Seeing Cadiculi's arrival, Cadiliang stopped what he was doing and smiled. "Third sister, didn't you say you were going to the library? Why are you here?" In Cadiliang's heart, he still doted on his third sister who was not much younger than him. Cadiculi came in front of Cadiliang and said with a sullen face, "Second brother, Didn't you say you were going to help me teach that Changyang Shoten a lesson? Hearing the name Changyang Shoten, the smile on Kadiliang's face gradually disappeared. His face slowly turned gloomy. He was still brooding about the freshman competition a few days ago. With his 90% holy force strength, he actually lost to Changyang Shoten, who only had 80% holy force. Moreover, he lost in such an ugly manner. Especially when Changyang Shoten kicked his butt, Kadiliang could never forget that. That kick was a great humiliation to him. Kadikuli's face was filled with anger as she said angrily, "Second brother, that Changyang Shoten is in the library right now. Should we go teach him a lesson?" "Yes, of course we should. This time I want to defeat him fair and square." "Third sister, let's go," Kadiliang said as he walked towards the library. In his heart, he refused to admit that Xianxia could defeat him. In his opinion, the reason why he had lost to Xianxia in the arena last time was because of his carelessness. Coupled with the restriction of the arena's terrain, this made the prideful Kadiliang extremely unconvinced. Kadikuli's face showed a trace of joy as she said, "This time second brother must teach that Changyang Shoten a lesson." Kadikuli followed closely behind Kadiliang as they walked towards the library. Although the two of them were at the 9th level of holy force, Kadikuli knew very well that she was definitely not a match for her second brother. If her second brother could not defeat Changyang Shoten, then she would definitely not be a match for Changyang Shoten. In the library, Xianxia was still reading the book in his hand with great interest. "Hello, may I sit here?" At this moment, a clear voice sounded in Xianxia's ear. Although Xianxia was very engrossed in the book, his spirit was very strong. The moment he heard the voice, he woke up from the book. Hearing the voice, Xianxia subconsciously raised his head to look. He saw a 17 or 18-year-old girl standing in front of him with a timid expression. The girl was wearing a student uniform. Her long black hair casually draped over her shoulders, emitting a dark glow. A pair of bright eyes were curiously sizing up Xianxia, and a faint smile hung on her delicate face. The girl was very beautiful. Her skin was white and tender, like a newborn baby's. Coupled with her light red cherry lips, it was simply enough to make people want to get close to her. Although she was only 17 or 18 years old, her exquisite figure was still perfectly outlined by the small student uniform. And in the girl's arms, she was holding a thick book. Xianxia casually looked at the girl, then turned his head to look around. At this time, he discovered that in the reading area, the few dozen tables were already filled with people. There was not a single empty table. Looking at the extremely beautiful girl in front of him, Xianxia said indifferently, "Sit anywhere you like." Then Xianxia's gaze fell on the book in his hands again, no longer looking at the girl in front of him, even though the girl in front of him was quite beautiful. The girl looked curiously at Xianxia, who was engrossed in reading the book, and a strange light flashed in her eyes. Then she slowly sat down and softly said, "Thank you." The girl's voice was soft and full of intelligence. Her voice was very pleasant to the ears, making people who heard it feel comfortable in their hearts. Xianxia acted as if he didn't hear her voice. He was still engrossed in reading the book in his hands, as if there was only this book in his eyes. The girl looked at Xianxia again. Her pair of bright eyes revealed a trace of curiosity, but she didn't say anything. Then she slowly placed the book in her arms on the table and slowly flipped through it. Although the girl was flipping the book, her movements were very elegant and full of nobility, as if she was born with it. The library was very quiet. Although there were many people, no one made any noise. Everyone was very focused on the book in their hands. At this moment, a man and a woman suddenly appeared at the entrance of the library. It was the brother and sister, Kadiliang and Kadikuli. "Second brother, look, he's there." Kadikuli pointed in Xianxia's direction and said softly. Kadiliang's gaze followed the direction of Kadikuli's finger and saw a slightly familiar back. Then, a trace of disdain appeared at the corner of his mouth. He puffed out his chest and arrogantly walked towards Xianxia's position, while Kadikuli followed closely behind him. Bam! When Kadiliang arrived in front of Xianxia's table, he directly slammed his palm on the table. Suddenly, a loud sound was heard, spreading far and wide in the quiet library. The sudden noise attracted the attention of all the students who were reading. They all shifted their gazes away from their books and landed on Jianchen's table. Aside from a few people who frowned, the rest were all waiting for a good show to unfold. Jianchen frowned and slowly raised his head. He looked straight at Ka Diliang and said in a low voice, "What are you doing?" Jianchen's voice carried a trace of anger. At this moment, even the girl sitting opposite Jianchen frowned and looked at Ka Diliang with an unhappy expression. Her face also carried a trace of anger. Just now, a loud sound suddenly rang in her ears. She had been quietly reading and had put all her attention into the book, so she was shocked. Ka Diliang looked at Jianchen with contempt and said arrogantly, "Changyang Shoten, I, Ka Diliang, officially challenge you. Do you dare to accept?" Ka Diliang's loud voice spread throughout the first floor of the library, as if he was afraid that someone couldn't hear him. "Challenge!" Jianchen's face showed a trace of disdain and snorted, "Not interested. Please leave immediately and don't disturb me from reading. I don't have that much time to waste on you." Chapter 20. Jianchen couldn't help but feel a burst of anger in his heart as he stared at Ka Diliang with disdain. Jianchen couldn't help but raise his voice. "Loser, what qualifications do you have to challenge me?" Jianchen's tone had a hint of arrogance. This was naturally cultivated in his previous life, and now it was inadvertently revealed. But when he heard Jianchen call him a loser, Ka Diliang's handsome face turned pale with anger, and his eyes flashed with a raging fire. If it wasn't for the fact that he didn't dare to violate the library's rule of prohibiting all fighting, he would have already attacked. Ka Di Chioli, who was standing beside Ka Diliang, also had a face full of anger. She glared at Jianchen and shouted, "Oof, you don't even dare to accept my second brother's challenge? Are you still a man?" Hearing Ka Di Chioli's words, Ka Diliang's eyes lit up. He suppressed the anger in his heart and said with disdain, "That's right, not daring to accept someone's challenge is the behavior of a coward. Changyang Shoten, I'll be waiting for you at the arena. If you admit that you're a coward, then you don't have to come. Third sister, let's go to the arena." After saying that, Ka Diliang looked at Jianchen with hatred again and turned to walk out of the library. "Changyang Shoten, did you hear that? If you don't dare to come, then you're a coward." After saying that, Ka Di Chioli also turned to leave. "Changyang Shoten, isn't that the champion of this year's new student competition?" "Yeah, I heard that Changyang Shoten used only 80% of his holy force to defeat several new students who had 90% of their holy force. He's very powerful." After Ka Di Chioli left, the entire library was filled with a buzzing sound of discussion. Without exception, everyone was talking about the champion of this year's new student competition, Changyang Shoten. The girl sitting opposite of Jianchen looked at Jianchen with a bit of surprise. Her pair of beautiful eyes blinked slightly, and it was easy to see the trace of surprise on her face. Jianchen slowly closed the book in his hand. At this moment, his expression was very ugly. After being disturbed by the Ka Diliang siblings, he didn't have the mood to continue reading. Moreover, the Ka Diliang siblings had already said so much, so Jianchen had no choice but to accept their challenge. Otherwise, he was afraid that the entire school would look down on him. Although Jianchen didn't care much about his reputation, he represented Changyang Prefecture behind him. Moreover, his elder brother Changyang, who was still here. If he didn't accept the challenge, then Wu Ning would bring shame to Changyang Prefecture. Even his elder brother Changyang, who couldn't avoid the ridicule of others in the academy. Jianchen slowly stood up from his chair and walked towards the bookshelf in front of him with the books in his hand. After putting the books back in their original position, he walked straight out of the library. At this moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Jianchen. "Hey, Changyang Shoten." Just when Jianchen had just walked to the entrance of the library, the girl sitting opposite of him suddenly opened her mouth. Hearing this, Jianchen subconsciously stopped his footsteps. His gaze was calm as he looked at the beautiful girl and said in an indifferent tone, "What's the matter?" Listening to Jianchen's indifferent tone, the girl was a little dissatisfied and curled her lips. However, she didn't say anything. She immediately walked in front of Jianchen and said softly, "Changyang Shoten, are you going to the arena to accept his challenge?" Jianshan nodded slightly and said softly, "Actually, you don't have to accept this challenge. Loud noises are prohibited in the library. That person just now has already violated the rules set by the academy. You can go to the principal and report him. He will definitely be punished. In Kargath Academy, there has never been anyone who dares to go against the principal's orders." The girl said. Hearing this, Jianshan's impression of the girl immediately improved. He then chuckled and said, "Since he has already said so, then I will definitely accept this challenge." After saying this, Jianshan didn't say anything else and directly walked out of the library. The girl looked at Jianshan's disappearing figure and her eyes flickered a few times. After a slight hesitation, she immediately ran to the table she was sitting at and placed the thick book she was reading on the bookshelf. Then, she quickly walked out of the library and walked towards the arena. After the girl left, the library was silent for a while. Then, suddenly, a loud voice rang out, "There's a good show to watch. A newcomer king with 80% holy force fighting a newcomer with 90% holy force. Anyone who doesn't watch would be a fool." Following the voice, a boy who looked to be about 18 years old and wearing a school uniform ran out of the library. After the two of them left, some of the students who were reading in the library also put the books in their hands back to their original places and left one after another, running towards the arena. The academy's martial arts field was built in a corner of the field. There were 5 circular arenas with a diameter of about 20 meters. However, the area of the martial arts field was not large. It could only accommodate a few hundred spectators. Otherwise, the freshman competition would not have been held in the field a few days ago in a temporary arena. When Jianshan arrived at the arena, he saw Kadi Liang standing in one of the arenas with his arms crossed in front of his chest. His face was full of arrogance. Besides Kadi Chioli, there were dozens of students wearing school uniforms standing in front of the arenas and discussing animatedly. Seeing Jianshan coming from afar, Kadi Liang, who was standing in the arena, sneered and said loudly, "I thought you were a coward and didn't dare to come." Jianshan snorted with disdain and directly jumped into the arena. With his arms crossed, he stood in the arena and said coldly, "Make your move. I'll give you 10 moves. Within these 10 moves, I won't fight back." After hearing Jianshan's arrogant words, the dozens of students watching below the arena all exclaimed and began to discuss in low voices. Most of them were seniors of the academy. Among them, there were many who didn't think highly of Jianshan. They all thought that the reason why Jianshan was able to win against Kadi Liang in the arena during the freshman competition was because Kadi Liang was careless. Kadi Liang's eyes were filled with anger. Everyone could tell that Jianshan was looking down on him from what he had just said. "Changyang Shoten, you are more arrogant than I thought," Kadi Liang said in a deep voice. Jianshan looked at Kadi Liang calmly and said indifferently, "If you want to fight, then hurry up. I don't have that much time to waste with you." Kadi Liang snorted and said with a cold smile, "Why are you in such a hurry? When everyone is here, I will defeat you in front of everyone." Kadi Liang was still brooding about losing to Jianshan in the freshman competition, especially when Jianshan kicked his butt. To him, it was an unforgettable shame. In Kadi Liang's heart, he thought that he lost to Jianshan in the freshman competition because of his carelessness. Therefore, he wanted to use this opportunity to regain his lost face and humiliate Jianshan again. Gradually, more and more people gathered around the arena, and the number of people was still increasing. In the distance, there were still quite a few students walking towards the arena. The news of this challenge had obviously been announced by Kadi Liang. In just a short while, there were already more than 200 people gathered around the arena. Almost everyone had the mentality of watching a good show. In the crowd, Kadi Liang's elder brother, Kadi Yun, was also standing in the crowd. Beside him were several men and women who were about the same age as him. "Fourth brother, do your best. Your elder brother has high hopes for you." Suddenly, a slightly deep but very familiar voice came from below the arena. Hearing this, Jianshan turned his head and saw his elder brother, Changyang, who, standing below the arena and looking at him with an encouraging face. Jianshan smiled and nodded to Changyang, who without saying anything. Right at this moment, Someone moved a table over and shouted, "Place your bets! Place your bets! Place your bets on whoever wins. Hurry up if you want to bet. I bet on Ka Di Liang, 10 gold coins. I bet on Changyang Shoten, 20 gold coins. I bet on Ka Di Liang, 50 gold coins." Gradually, the fight between Jianchen and Ka Di Liang was treated as a gamble by the surrounding students. Those who were able to come here to watch during class were all people born in noble families. They didn't lack money. The bets ranged from 10 gold coins to 10 purple coins. Almost 80% of the people who participated in the bet on Ka Di Liang, and only 20% on Jianchen. 10 purple coins, I bet on Changyang Shoten. Changyang who took out 10 purple coins and placed them on the table. I also bet on Changyang Shoten, 10 purple coins. Following closely behind Changyang who, a soft and lively voice suddenly sounded. It was actually the beautiful girl who sat across from Jianchen in the library. She was clearly born in a noble family. Her speech and behavior were full of nobility, as if she was born with it. Seeing the girl bet 10 purple coins on Changyang Shoten, many people were surprised. Changyang who was Changyang Shoten's elder brother. It was understandable that she would bet on Changyang Shoten, but the girl's action made many people puzzled. Even so, no one said anything. In the ring, Jianchen looked at Ka Di Liang with a strange expression and said, "Can we start now?" Ka Di Liang's face was full of confidence. He sneered and said, "Changyang Shoten, you just said that you would let me have 10 moves first. It's not too late to regret now. A gentleman's word cannot be taken back. Bring it on," Jianchen said. Arrogant. Although Ka Di Liang was very confused about the meaning of the phrase, "a gentleman's word cannot be taken back," he only needed to guess to understand the general meaning. Ka Di Liang didn't waste any more words and directly rushed towards Jianchen. Since Jianchen said that he would let him have 10 moves first, he didn't have the slightest hesitation and just went all out to attack. Ka Di Liang rushed in front of Jianchen and directly punched towards Jianchen. The speed of this punch was very fast and carried with it the sound of breaking air. Facing Ka Di Liang's punch, Jianchen only took a small step back. When Ka Di Liang's fist was about to reach his face, it stopped because of the limitation of the length of his arm. Phew, that was close, I was almost hit. This Changyang Shoten can't only have this much strength, right? The fight has just started and he was almost hit. If he was hit by this punch, he would have been seriously injured and the winner would have been decided. This Changyang Shoten's luck is really good. He can even dodge like this. Chapter 21. Seeing that he was so close to hitting Jianchen, Ka Di Liang couldn't help but feel a little regretful. However, his hands weren't slow as he quickly kicked towards Jianchen. Very quickly, the 10 moves limit was over. During these 10 moves, Jianchen didn't fight back and easily dodged all of Ka Di Liang's attacks. In the eyes of others, every time Jianchen dodged an attack from Ka Di Liang, it was a close call. This made many people below the stage sweat, including Changyang Hu. Although Ka Di Liang's attacks were very fast, he couldn't even touch Jianchen's clothes during these 10 moves. This made Ka Di Liang very angry. Raising his hand to block Ka Di Liang's fist, Jianchen said indifferently, 10 moves have passed. Now it's time for me to fight back. As he said that, Jianchen kicked towards Ka Di Liang. The speed of this kick was so fast that it was too late to dodge. Just as Ka Di Liang was about to reach out to block, Jianchen's kick had already landed on Ka Di Liang's chest. Thump, thump, thump. The powerful force from the kick caused Ka Di Liang to stagger back a few steps before he could steady himself. When his body stabilized, Ka Di Liang looked at Jianchen with a shocked expression. Jianchen clearly only had 80% of Saint Force, but the strength of this kick was beyond his imagination. He almost couldn't block it. During the last freshman competition, Ka Di Liang didn't fight with Jianchen at all, so he didn't know Jianchen's exact strength. Now that he had fought, he understood that Jianchen's strength was much stronger than he had imagined. And from the powerful force from that kick, he even suspected that Jianchen's strength was more than 80% of Saint Force. Perhaps Jianchen wanted to end the battle quickly, so he didn't give Ka Di Liang any time to catch his breath. He quickly rushed forward and threw a punch towards Ka Di Liang's nose. Ka Di Liang's expression gradually became serious. His body awkwardly dodged Jianshan's punch, then he raised his fist and smashed it towards Jianshan's head. Jianshan revealed a cold smile. He reached out one hand to block Ka Di Liang's fist, while his other hand tightly held onto Ka Di Liang's arm. He then stood firmly with his feet in a horse stance. At the same time, he lowered his waist and suddenly exerted strength in his arms. He grabbed Ka Di Liang's arm and flung him far away. This was the wrestling technique that Jianshan learned from the Mongols in his previous life. Although he was only proficient in swordsmanship, he had walked a long path and naturally had a wide range of knowledge. With his almost photographic memory, he naturally learned a lot. Besides swordsmanship, Jianshan also knew a lot of miscellaneous things, but he only knew a little about them. Ka Di Liang's body was as light as a feather. He was easily flung out by Jianshan. He flew a distance of 4 to 5 meters in the air and finally fell on the stage with a pung sound. Huff! Seeing that Jianshan's weak body could actually do such a thing, many of the students below the stage gasped. For a moment, everyone's gaze towards Jianshan changed. After the battle between the two, no one dared to look down on Jianshan anymore. Ka Di Yun and Ka Di Chiuli's faces gradually became ugly. This situation was beyond their expectations. Changyang Shoten, you really do have some skills. Ka Di Yun gritted his teeth and said in a low voice. Ka Di Liang climbed up from the stage in an extremely sorry state. His face was gloomy, and his gaze towards Jianshan was filled with hatred. Ka Di Liang let out an angry roar. His 9th layer Saint Force was completely concentrated in his palms, and then he quickly arrived in front of Jianshan. Both of his palms pressed forward at the same time and fiercely struck towards Jianshan's chest. Jianshan sneered. The Saint Force in his body quickly condensed in his palms, and then suddenly struck out, colliding with Ka Di Liang's palms. With a muffled sound, Jianshan and Ka Di Liang's palms fiercely collided. Both of their palms separated immediately upon contact, and the strong rebound force caused both of their bodies to fly backwards at the same time. Jianshan's body was constantly twisting, and his feet were constantly crossing each other. With his skillful technique, he quickly unloaded the rebound force. Looking at Ka Di Liang, who was still constantly retreating, a sharp light flashed in Jianshan's eyes. Then his body quickly rushed forward, and then he jumped up high, and with all his strength, he kicked towards Ka Di Liang, who was still constantly retreating. In a situation where he could not control his body, Ka Di Liang did not have the strength to resist at all. He was directly kicked in the chest by Jianshan, and immediately his whole body was kicked out of the stage. Falling to the ground, Ka Di Liang's face had become extremely pale, and then he spat out a mouthful of blood. It was obvious that he was not lightly injured. Second brother! Second brother! Ka Di Liang and Ka Di Chiuli hurriedly ran to Ka Di Liang's side. Looking at Ka Di Liang's pale face and some blood at the corner of his mouth, both of their faces were filled with worry. Second brother, are you all right? Ka Di Yun asked in a deep voice, and his face had already become very ugly. This time was different from the last time. In the last competition, Ka Di Liang could be said to have lost to Jianshan due to a moment of carelessness, but this time was different. This time, Ka Di Liang had lost to Jianshan in a fair fight. Didn't this mean that Ka Di Yun, whose Saint Force had already reached the 9th layer, was not even comparable to a freshman with only 80% Saint Force? Second brother, how are you? Are you seriously injured? Ka Di Chiuli asked with concern, her voice filled with worry. Ka Di Liang stood up with difficulty with the help of the two. Gently shaking his head, he said, Big brother, third sister, I'm fine. I've only suffered some light injuries. Ka Di Liang's voice was somewhat weak. Seeing Ka Di Liang's pale face, Ka Di Yun's eyes were burning with anger. Raising his head, he sharply looked at Jianshan, who was standing on the stage, and said in a low voice, Third sister, you take care of second brother. I'm going to teach that arrogant brat a lesson. Saying so, Ka Di Yun directly jumped onto the stage. Big brother, you can't. Big brother, don't. Ka Di Yun and Ka Di Chiuli wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Seeing Ka Di Yun already on the stage, Ka Di Liang and Ka Di Chuli both sighed at the same time. Regardless of whether Ka Di Yun won or lost, from now on, their Ka Di family's prestige in Kargath Academy would be greatly reduced. Originally, it was a fair duel. Even if they lost, it wouldn't be a big deal. At most, they would lose some face. But now, with Ka Di Yun's interference, the result changed. A senior student who had been in the academy for several years actually dared to bully a new student. If this matter spread out, the three siblings would inevitably be ridiculed by the academy. Jianxin's eyes indifferently looked at Ka Di Yun, who jumped onto the stage. A faint sneer appeared on his face, and he said, "Do you want to avenge your second brother?" Ka Di Yun fiercely stared at Jianxin. He coldly snorted and said in a deep voice, "Changyang Shoten, your strength is indeed very strong. But since you injured my second brother, I will definitely not let you leave the stage unharmed." Hearing this, many of the spectators below the ring frowned, and the way they looked at Ka Di Yun suddenly changed. "Ka Di Yun, what do you mean? Are you bullying my Changyang prefecture because there is no one left?" As soon as Ka Di Yun's voice fell, a slightly deep voice came from below the stage. Then, a figure jumped onto the stage. It was Jianxin's big brother, Changyang Hu. Changyang Hu fiercely stared at Ka Di Yun and angrily said, "Ka Di Yun, if you want to fight, I will fight with you." Seeing that Changyang Hu was willing to stand up for him, Jianxin could not help but feel warmth in his heart. He softly said, "Big brother, you can go down. I can deal with this matter." Changyang Hu shook his head and said, "No, fourth brother, you should go down. Ka Di Yun's strength has already reached the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force. You are not his opponent. I will help you deal with him." Hearing this, Jianxin slightly hesitated. Then he slightly nodded and said, "Big brother, be careful." With that, Jianxin directly left the stage. Ka Di Yun looked at Changyang Hu with disdain and sneered, "Changyang Hu, you asked for it. Don't blame me." It's still too early for you to say that. It's not certain who will win yet," Changyang Hu coldly said. Both he and Ka Di Yun were at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force. If Ka Di Yun had not condensed a saint weapon and become a saint, their strength would have been on par. Ka Di Yun sneered. Looking at Changyang Hu, his eyes were filled with disdain. He slowly raised his right hand and a powerful golden energy fluctuation came from his right hand. It gradually condensed into a huge golden sword. The golden sword was extremely large. It was 5 feet long and as wide as a palm. From the long hilt, it seemed to be a two-handed sword. Seeing the huge sword in Ka Di Yun's hand, Jianxin slightly frowned. In Changyang Hu, he had read many books about saint weapons. Naturally, he could tell that this sword was Ka Di Yun's saint weapon. This was the first saint weapon Jianxin had seen since he came to this world. Although he already knew that a saint weapon was a weapon condensed from saint force, Jianxin still could not help but be surprised when he saw it with his own eyes. Although he could clearly feel that this saint weapon was completely condensed from energy, it looked like a real weapon. It did not have the slightest illusory feeling of energy. Jianxin was amazed. As soon as the huge golden sword appeared, cries of surprise rang out from below the stage. Saint weapon, he actually condensed a saint weapon. Saint, he's already become a saint. Ka Di Yun has actually succeeded in condensing a saint weapon. Changyang Hu is in trouble now. Although there was only a single step between the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force to Saint, this step was very difficult to take. In Kargath Academy, most of the older students had reached the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force, but without exception, they were all stuck at the step of condensing a saint weapon. If one did not possess extraordinary talent, it would be very difficult to condense a saint weapon. On the Tianyuan continent, there were many people who could only remain at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force for their entire lives. They would never be able to break through to Saint Realm. From this, it could be seen just how difficult it was to successfully reach Saint Realm. Once one succeeded in becoming a saint, their strength would greatly increase. Not only would a saint weapon be their only weapon, but it would also be connected to their thoughts. Moreover, it would be able to unleash attacks far greater than their own strength. Seeing the huge golden sword in Ka Di Yun's hand, Changyang Hu's face became extremely ugly. With a saint weapon, Ka Diyun's strength had undergone an earth-shattering change. He was definitely not someone who could only reach the peak of the 10th layer of saint force. Big Brother has actually succeeded in condensing a saint weapon. Below the stage, Ka Di Chioli looked at the saint weapon in Ka Diyun's hand in pleasant surprise. Her face was filled with excitement. Looking at the huge golden sword in Ka Diyun's hand with envy, Ka Di Liang's face was also filled with joy. Ka Di Liang and Ka Di Chioli had only just learned about Ka Diyun's breakthrough to Saint Realm. With the saint weapon in hand, Ka Diyun's confidence immediately swelled to an unprecedented level. His face was filled with pride. Seeing Changyanghu's extremely ugly expression, he felt an indescribable sense of pleasure. Haha, Changyanghu, are you afraid now? Kneel down and kowtow to me 3 times, then call me grandfather, and I'll let you go today. Otherwise, you know what the consequences will be. Ka Diyun laughed wildly. His tone was extremely savage. Hearing this, Changyanghu's face turned ashen. He roared furiously, "You're dreaming, Ka Diyun. Even if you've become a Saint Realm expert, I, Changyanghu, am still not afraid of you." Ka Diyun looked at Changyanghu arrogantly and said disdainfully, "Changyanghu, what are you going to use to fight me?" Changyanghu furiously glared at Ka Diyun as flames of fury burned in his eyes. "Changyanghu, take this sword." At this moment, an iron sword was thrown from below the stage, directly flying towards Changyanghu. Chapter 22. With a sword in hand, Changyanghu could not help but feel more courageous. Although he knew that he was still no match for Ka Diyun, who had already become a saint, he could at least put up a fight. "Changyanghu, do you really want to fight me with an ordinary iron sword? You're dreaming. Now, I'll show you the strength of a saint." With that, Ka Diyun quickly rushed towards Changyanghu. The 2-meter-long sword in his hand seemed to be weightless in his hand. With an ear-piercing sound, it directly swept towards Changyanghu at an extremely fast speed. Changyanghu's face became very solemn. He quickly retreated, narrowly dodging the incoming sword. Ka Diyun's 2-handed sword swept past Changyanghu's clothes, causing a few pieces of cloth to slowly float in the air. After becoming a saint, Ka Diyun's strength had undergone an earth-shaking change. It was far from what Changyanghu, who was only at the peak of the 10th layer of saint force, could compare with. Just the first attack alone was already very dangerous for Changyanghu. Ha! Ka Diyun's movements did not stop at all after his first attack failed. He stepped forward, the powerful qi emitting from his body tightly oppressing Changyanghu. Then, he once again brandished his golden sword towards Changyanghu. Looking at the menacing huge sword, Changyanghu did not choose to take it head-on. The iron sword in his hand, which was made of ordinary iron, could not take on the powerful saint weapon in Ka Diyun's hand. The huge sword's attack speed was very fast. Changyanghu did not have time to think. Feeling that the huge sword was quickly closing in on his head, Changyanghu did not hesitate at all and directly dodged it. At this moment he did not care about his image. Boom! Just as Changyanghu moved away, Ka Diyun's huge sword had already fiercely struck the place where Changyanghu had been standing. The powerful energy contained in the saint weapon directly left a deep crack in the arena that was completely made of hard stone. Around the crack, fine cracks spread out like a spider's web, covering a radius of 1 meter. At this moment, Changyanghu took advantage of the opportunity when Ka Diyun did not have time to withdraw his saint weapon to swing his iron sword at Ka Diyun with all his strength. "Umph!" Ka Diyun snorted disdainfully. With a wave of his hands, the golden 2-handed sword, with a brilliant golden light, arrived at an extremely fast speed and fiercely collided with Changyanghu's iron sword. Following the crisp sound of iron weapons colliding, Changyanghu's iron sword was sent flying far away by Ka Diyun's saint weapon. The powerful recoil from the sword's hilt caused Changyanghu's hands to rupture, and traces of blood flowed out. Immediately afterwards, Ka Diyun suddenly kicked out, directly hitting Changyanghu's chest. The powerful force directly kicked Changyanghu's stocky body into the air, and finally sent him flying out of the arena. While his body was still in the air, A mouthful of blood sprayed out from Changyanghu's mouth, and his face had already turned pale. "Big brother!" Jianshan's face suddenly changed. Immediately after, he stamped his feet and directly jumped up from the ground. While in the air, Jianshan quickly flew towards Changyanghu under the astonished and disbelieving gazes of the crowd. Just as Changyanghu's body was about to fall to the ground, Jianshan finally caught him in time. Cough cough. Landing on the ground, Changyanghu violently coughed twice, and droplets of blood shot out from his mouth. The strength of a saint was much greater than that of someone who had not yet become a saint. Even though he was at the peak of the 10th layer of saint force, this was still the case. Just this kick alone had caused Changyanghu to suffer heavy internal injuries. "Big brother, are your injuries serious?" Jianshan forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart as he looked at Changyanghu with concern. Changyanghu shook his head. His eyes were filled with anger as he stared at the complacent Ka-Diyun in the arena. "I'm fine. I never thought that Ka-Diyun would actually successfully condense a saint weapon and become a saint. Big brother is no longer his opponent now." Changyanghu's voice was low, containing a strong sense of anger. "I'm sorry, big brother. I've implicated you." Looking at the pale Changyanghu due to his injuries, Jianshan felt some guilt in his heart. Hearing this, Changyanghu frowned. He suddenly turned his head and looked at Jianshan with some anger. "Fourth brother, what are you saying? Do you still treat me as your big brother?" At this point, Changyanghu's expression darkened. He sighed helplessly. "It's a pity that your big brother is useless. He still hasn't broken through to become a saint. Otherwise, Ka-Diyun definitely wouldn't be my opponent." Changyanghu's words warmed Jianshan's heart. He raised his head slightly to look at Ka-Diyun in the arena. A cold light flashed through Jianshan's eyes, and a trace of disdain appeared in his eyes. He then said flatly, "Big brother, rest here for a while. I'll go take revenge for you." With that, Jianshan walked towards the arena. Hearing Jianshan's words, Changyanghu's expression changed slightly. He immediately pulled Jianshan back. "No, fourth brother. You're no match for Ka-Diyun. Don't go." Jianshan smiled faintly. "Big brother, trust me." Jianshan's expression was filled with strong confidence. He then broke free from Changyanghu's grip and jumped onto the arena. Heavens, what is he doing? It looks like he's going to challenge Ka-Diyun. Heavens, is he crazy? He's only at the 8th layer of saint force, yet he dares to challenge Ka-Diyun who's already a saint. Isn't he just asking for trouble? As soon as Jianshan stepped onto the arena, cries of surprise rang out from below. No one thought that Jianshan, who only had 80% of saint force, would be a match for Ka-Diyun who had condensed a saint weapon and become a saint. How can he be so reckless? Ka-Diyun is a saint. He's much stronger than someone at the 10th layer of saint force. How can he be a match for Ka-Diyun? Below the arena, the girl who sat across from Jianshan in the library stared at Jianshan in disbelief. There was a faint trace of worry on her face. Ka-Diyun was stunned when he saw Jianshan jump onto the arena. However, he quickly recovered and sneered, "What, Changyang, do you still want to fight me?" Ka-Diyun did not take Jianshan seriously at all. After all, he was already a saint. Jianshan's eyes were filled with disdain. He said indifferently, "Can't I?" Ka-Diyun was stunned when he heard that. Then, a sinister smile appeared on his face. "Yes, of course you can." Right now, Ka-Diyun was already thinking about how he would humiliate Jianshan. After all, during the freshman competition, Jianshan had thrown Ka-Dikialai, a delicate beauty, off the stage without a care for her image. This had caused Ka-Diyun and Ka-Diliang to hold a grudge against Jianshan because they both loved this little sister of theirs dearly. Jianshan walked to the arena unhurriedly to pick up the two-handed greatsword that Changyanghu had dropped. Feeling the weight of the greatsword in his hand, Jianshan could not help but frown slightly. Although the greatsword weighed less than 100 jin, it was not far off. If it were not for the fact that Jianshan's saint force had reached the 8th layer, it would have been very difficult for him to pick up the greatsword. In his previous life, Jianshan's weapon of choice was a slender sword that was 2 fingers wide. He was famous for his fast swordsmanship and his attainments in the way of the sword. Now that he had switched to a two-handed greatsword, Jianshan could not help but feel that his hands and feet were tied. The great sword was very heavy. Jianshan could not use it at all. After all, just wielding the great sword required a lot of effort. Unfortunately, there were no other weapons here other than the great sword. After a slight hesitation, Jianshan gave up on the idea of using the great sword. He planned to fight Ka Diyun empty-handed. This way, he would at least have a great advantage in terms of speed and dexterity. Arriving at the center of the arena, Jianshan calmly looked at Ka Diyun. He rubbed his fists and said, "You make your move. I will fight you empty-handed." Ka Diyun's expression slightly changed. In his opinion, Jianshan was clearly looking down on him. A person whose saint force was still at the 8th layer actually said that he would fight empty-handed against a saint who had already condensed a saint weapon. This was a ruthless insult to that saint. Ka Diyun's eyes gradually became cold. He coldly snorted and said, "Xianxia, you are too arrogant." Finished speaking, the golden greatsword in Ka Diyun's hand slowly disappeared. He sneered and said, "So that others won't say that I am bullying you. Come, I will fight you empty-handed." Hearing this, a strange smile suddenly appeared on Jianshan's face. He did not waste any more words. He quickly rushed forward. When he arrived in front of Ka Diyun, he directly punched out with all his strength. The sound of air breaking could be heard as the punch flew towards Ka Diyun's head. Ka Diyun's face was full of disdain. He also punched out, colliding with Jianshan's fist. On the fist, there was a faint golden light flowing. This was a phenomenon that would only appear when one reached the saint realm. Just as the two fists were about to collide, Jianshan's fist suddenly opened into a palm. When it came into contact with Ka Diyun's fist, Jianshan's fierce palm suddenly became soft like a sponge. Then his whole arm slowly moved in the path of Taiji fist. It led Ka Diyun's fist to the left and circled in the air. In the blink of an eye, the powerful force of Ka Diyun's fist was unloaded. Then he stretched out his other hand like lightning. His palm turned into a knife and fiercely hit the middle joint of Ka Diyun's arm. "Kacha!" A light sound of bones crisscrossing was heard. Jianshan's hand knife directly dislocated Ka Diyun's joint. At the same time, Ka Diyun let out a painful groan. The severe pain from his arm made his face turn pale. After dislocating the joint of Ka Diyun's arm, Jianshan didn't stop at all. His palms tightly clasped Ka Diyun's arm, and then he twisted it with force. Ah! Suddenly, Ka Diyun could no longer maintain his previous demeanor. He let out a painful scream like a pig being slaughtered. The severe pain from his arm made him feel as if his entire arm was broken. He had never experienced such a heart-wrenching pain since he was a child. In a short time, Ka Diyun's face turned pale, and his forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. Hearing Ka Diyun's miserable scream, the originally lively discussion under the ring suddenly became silent. Everyone looked at Jianshan in surprise. Their eyes were full of disbelief. This situation was obviously the opposite of what they had expected. Chapter 23. While feeling the pain, Ka Diyun raised his other hand and smashed it towards Jianshan's arms. At the same time, Ka Diyun's right leg quickly kicked towards Jianshan's crotch. Even though his arms were restricted, Ka Diyun was still able to make a good decision to counterattack. From this, it was not hard to see that Ka Diyun had some experience in fighting. Facing Ka Diyun's double attack, Jianshan was unable to take it head-on. He helplessly let go of Ka Diyun's right arm and at the same time, he used profound footwork and circled around Ka Diyun's front like a ghost. He arrived behind Ka Diyun and condensed all of his saint force into his palms as he struck towards Ka Diyun's back with lightning speed. Sensing the strong wind coming from behind him, Ka Diyun did not hesitate and quickly dodged to the side. However, to Ka Diyun's surprise, no matter how he dodged, the strong wind behind him continued to follow him. Bang! In a situation where Ka Diyun was unable to dodge at all, Jianshan's palms landed on Ka Diyun's back. With a muffled sound, Ka Diyun's body was strongly impacted and he uncontrollably took 2 steps forward. However, he was still a saint who was stronger than Jianshan after all, so he quickly stabilized himself. At this moment, his face had become even paler. Jianxin's two palms had landed on the same spot on his body. The combination of the attacks had almost reached the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force. Even though he was much stronger than Jianxin, he still suffered some light injuries. At this moment, he could only feel the blood and qi in his body churning as great pain came from his organs. Just as Ka Di-yun stabilized himself, Jianxin had already arrived behind him and struck towards Ka Di-yun with his right palm again. Jianxin's palm seemed light, as if there was no strength behind it at all. However, to those who had witnessed Jianxin's strength, no one believed that Jianxin's palm was as simple as it seemed on the surface. Ka Di-yun suddenly turned around. At this moment, his eyes were filled with extreme anger. He had suffered such a great loss at the hands of an opponent who was much weaker than him. To him, this was no longer a simple humiliation. Ha! Ka Di-yun suddenly let out an angry roar. His eyes flashed with madness as a faint golden light constantly flashed on his fist. Powerful Saint Force continued to condense on his fist, and he struck towards Jianxin's chest. Ka Di-yun did not prepare to dodge Jianxin's palm's seemingly light palm. He planned to take a hit on Jianxin's attack with his own body. Ka Di-yun had no intention of dodging Jianxin's palm. Everything happened in a split second. Their attacks struck each other at the same time. Jianxin's seemingly light palm strike seemed to have no power at all, silently landing on Ka Di-yun's chest. When Ka Di-yun's fist landed on Jianxin's body, a muffled sound rang out. The powerful Saint Force had punched a fist-sized hole in Jianxin's chest, revealing his skin that was so white that even women would be jealous of it. In the blink of an eye, the area that had been hit had become a mass of bruises. Bang! Bang! After receiving Ka Di-yun's full-strength punch, Jianxin's complexion changed slightly. His originally rosy complexion paled a bit, and the powerful impact of the punch caused him to uncontrollably retreat. He didn't stop until he reached the edge of the ring. At this moment, Jianxin's condition looked like nothing had happened except that his complexion was a bit paler than before. Ka Di-yun's full-strength punch with the strength of a saint didn't cause much damage to Jianxin. Although Jianxin's strength was only at the 8th layer of Saint Force, he had been using the methods recorded in the Azulite Sword Codex to refine his body. His body, meridians, and internal organs were all extremely sturdy. Therefore, although Jianxin looked thin and weak on the surface, his body's defense and ability to resist attacks were jaw-dropping. Although Ka Di-yun was a saint and was much stronger than Jianxin, if he didn't use a weapon, it would be very difficult for him to heavily injure Jianxin with just his fists and legs. At most, he would only be able to lightly injure Jianxin. On the other hand, although Ka Di-yun was still standing in his original position, his complexion had become extremely ugly. His facial muscles trembled slightly as if he was in great pain. Earlier, when Jianxin's seemingly light palm landed on his chest, a strange force had been transmitted into his body through Jianxin's palm. As soon as this force entered his body, it suddenly became extremely violent, wildly destroying Ka Di-yun's internal organs. Ka Di-yun's complexion was extremely gloomy. He circulated the saint force in his body with all his might to purge the chaotic force. With the support of his powerful saint force, he very quickly purged the force that Jianxin had sent into his body. Even so, Ka Di-yun's internal organs had been injured by this force. Although the injury wasn't serious, it would still affect his performance in the upcoming battle. Ka Di-yun's shock was unparalleled as he coldly stared at the calm Jianxin standing in front of him. He had never thought that with his strength as a saint, he would be reduced to such a sorry state by someone with only the 8th layer of Saint Force. Even though he didn't use a saint weapon, it was still extremely easy for him to defeat someone with the 10th layer of Saint Force, let alone Jianxin who only had the 8th layer of Saint Force. At this moment, after knowing that Jianxin wasn't easy to deal with, Ka Di-yun couldn't help but feel like he was riding a tiger and couldn't get off. After the previous few exchanges, he understood that if he didn't use a saint weapon, it would be very difficult for him to defeat Jianxin. He might even be defeated by his opponent. But even if he used a saint weapon to defeat Jianxin, it definitely wouldn't be a glorious thing. Moreover, he had clearly said that he wouldn't use a saint weapon. If he went back on his word now, even if he won in the end, his reputation would be ruined. After all, there were many spectators below the stage, and there was no lack of older students among them. Moreover, Ka Diyun, the eldest son of the Joseon Empire's Ka Diyun, couldn't afford to lose face like this. It was a long story, but Ka Diyun's thoughts were all in a single thought. At this moment, Xianxia once again charged towards Ka Diyun. Both of his hands formed into palms, and he continuously attacked Ka Diyun. The speed of his palms was extremely fast, and although his palms looked incomparably chaotic, they maintained a mysterious trajectory from beginning to end. Those lightning-fast palms actually created a series of afterimages in Ka Diyun's line of sight. Ka Diyun struggled to block Xianxia's attacks. His right hand was dislocated, and he didn't have the time to fix it. At this moment, he could only use his left hand and his 2 legs to block Xianxia's attacks. Even so, with his saint force that was definitely stronger than Xianxia's, Ka Diyun fell into an invincible position for a while. At this moment, Ka Diyun had already begun to take Xianxia seriously. He no longer had the slightest bit of a petty heart. In his heart, he had already regarded Xianxia as an opponent on the same level as himself. The two people quickly fought on the stage, and the battle gradually came to a stalemate. Xianxia used his full strength in each of his attacks, not daring to hold back in the slightest. After all, Ka Diyun's strength was definitely stronger than his. Only by doing this could he temporarily maintain a stalemate with Ka Diyun. Xianxia's attacks became faster and faster. His palms gradually connected in front of Ka Diyun's eyes, and it became more and more difficult for Ka Diyun to block. Gradually, Ka Diyun saw that the sky was filled with Xianxia's palms. It was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake with his eyes. He could only rely on his ears to catch the subtle sound of each palm breaking through the air. Finally, in a moment of carelessness, Xianxia's palm fiercely hit Ka Diyun's left shoulder. Ka Diyun's following movements couldn't help but slow down after being attacked. At this time, Xianxia's next attack poured down like a torrential storm on Ka Diyun's body. Pang! 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 The muffled sounds of Xianxia's palms hitting Ka Diyun's body almost merged into one. Receiving such a fierce attack, even with Ka Diyun's strength as a saint, he couldn't withstand it. His feet kept retreating, and a trace of blood flowed down from the corner of his mouth. Seeing that Ka Diyun had already retreated to the edge of the stage, Xianxia's eyes flashed with a sharp light. He then shouted in a low voice, and once again hit Ka Diyun's chest with all his strength. The strength of this palm was clearly much stronger than before, and Ka Diyun directly fell out of the stage. Xianxia was slightly panting on the stage. Continuously using his full strength had consumed a lot of his saint force. At this moment, there wasn't much saint force left in his body. If Ka Diyun didn't lose, then Xianxia wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. The area below the stage was silent. Everyone stared blankly at Xianxia, who stood proudly on the stage. At this moment, everyone's eyes were filled with disbelief, and their faces were filled with shock. This result had already exceeded everyone's expectations. No one had thought that Xianxia, who was only at the 8th layer of saint force, would be able to defeat a saint. More importantly, he had defeated the saint while he was completely unharmed. Even though the saint hadn't used a saint weapon, the result still shocked everyone present. At this moment, the entire stage had fallen into a strange silence. It was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard clearly. Even though there were over 200 people surrounding the stage, no one made a single sound. Big brother. A moment later, the silence was finally broken by a voice. The siblings, Ka Diliang and Ka Dikialai, quickly ran towards where Ka Diyun had fallen. Following this voice, the rest of the crowd abruptly woke up as well. Immediately, the originally quiet stage exploded into an uproar as noisy and excited discussions filled the air. Heavens, I'm not dreaming. A person at the 8th layer of saint force can actually defeat a saint. This is unprecedented in our academy. That Changyang Shoten really is a new student who only has 80% saint force. Even someone at the peak of the 10th layer might not necessarily be able to defeat a saint without a saint weapon. That Changyang Shoten's strength definitely isn't at the 8th layer of saint force. Perhaps he's already a saint who has condensed a saint weapon. Otherwise, how could he have defeated Senior Ka Diyun, who's already a saint? Could it be that Changyang Shoten used some kind of despicable method to defeat Ka Diyun? Jianshin ignored the discussions of the crowd. After jumping off the stage, he directly arrived in front of his big brother, Changyang Hu. Looking at Changyang Hu, who was staring at him in shock, Jianshin smiled and said, "Big brother, I didn't disappoint you, did I? I won." Changyang Hu had an excited expression on his face. He tightly grabbed Jianshin's shoulders with both hands and emotionally said, "Fourth brother, you're really too amazing. You actually defeated Ka Diyun, who's already a saint. Your big brother really admires you." With that, Changyang Hu directly gave Jianshin a bear hug. Chapter 24. Hearing this, Changyang Hu subconsciously looked around, then nodded and said, "Okay, fourth brother, let's go to your dorm first. You must tell me how you defeated Ka Diyun, and then I'll invite a few friends to celebrate tonight." Jianshin had a faint smile on his face as he said, "Big brother, I can teach you how to defeat Ka Diyun, but as for the celebration, I think we should forget about it." "Okay, we'll do as you say. Let's go, fourth brother, let's go back to the dorm first. It's too noisy here." Saying this, Changyang Hu pulled Jianshin and quickly walked towards the dorm. Changyang Shoten. Just as Jianshin had taken a few steps, a delicate and soft voice suddenly sounded from behind him. Hearing this somewhat familiar voice, Jianshin was slightly surprised. He immediately turned his head to look behind him and saw that the person who spoke was actually the very beautiful girl he had met in the library before. "What's the matter?" Jianshin's gaze calmly observed the girl's devastatingly beautiful appearance as he asked doubtfully. The girl's face revealed a faint smile, as if she was very happy. She waved a very delicately crafted purse in her hand and said with joy, "Changyang Shoten, you've won 100 purple coins for me. Thank you very much." The girl's voice was very gentle, but also very pleasant to listen to, like the cry of a lark, pleasing to the ear. Hearing this, Changyang Hu seemed to remember something. He fiercely slapped his forehead and said, "Aya, if you didn't mention it, I would have forgotten. I still had 100 purple coins bet. That's all of my property, and I still haven't gotten it back. Fourth brother, wait a moment, big brother will go get the money." Before he finished speaking, Changyang Hu ran off like the wind. Seeing Changyang Hu's hurried appearance, Jianshin couldn't help but reveal a trace of amusement on his face. At this time, the girl slowly walked in front of Jianshin. Her pair of beautiful eyes were filled with curiosity as she stared at Jianshin's handsome face. She smiled and said, "Hello. Changyang Shoten, I'm Yu. I don't know if I can ask you a question." Jianshin smiled and said, "Classmate Yu, if you have any questions, just ask, but I can't guarantee that I'll be able to answer them." "That's fine." Yu smiled faintly and continued, "Changyang Xianxia, may I ask if you're really only at the 8th level of Saint Force?" Hearing this, Jianshin hesitated slightly before nodding. "Yes, my strength is currently around the 8th layer, but I feel that I'm not far from the 9th layer." Hearing this, Yu's eyes revealed a trace of surprise. She said in surprise, "Changyang Shoten, is your strength really not at the Saint Realm?" Yu's tone was somewhat doubtful. She clearly didn't quite believe Changyang Shoten's words. Hearing Yu's doubtful words, Jianshin frowned slightly and said with a bit of displeasure, "Classmate Yu, I seem to have already answered you." Although she was a devastatingly beautiful woman, in Jianshin's eyes, she was no different from an ordinary woman. Hearing this, Sima Yu immediately reacted and smiled apologetically, saying, "I'm sorry, classmate Changyang Xianxia. I was just too surprised. I hope you don't take offense." As soon as Yu finished speaking, Changyang Hu ran out of the crowd with a bag of money in his hand with an excited expression. When he arrived in front of Jianshin, Changyang Hu waved the bulging bag in his hand and said proudly, "Fourth brother, your big brother is wise, right? In such a short time, I've won 100 purple coins." 100 purple coins was not a small amount for ordinary people, but for those commoners who lived a simple life all day, 100 purple coins was enough for their family of 3 to live a carefree life for the rest of their lives. Looking at the bulging bag of money in Changyang Hu's hand, Jianshin's face also showed a trace of joy. Then he said to Yu, "Classmate Yu, if there's nothing else, I'll leave first." Yu smiled and said, "Well, I won't disturb you. It just so happens that I haven't finished reading my book, so I have to go back to the library. Chaongshoten, goodbye." Then Jianchen took his big brother Changyang back to his dormitory. As soon as the door closed, Changyang couldn't wait to say, "Fourth brother, now you should tell me how you defeated Ka Diyun and how strong you are. Don't tell me you've become a saint like they said." Towards the end, Changyang couldn't help showing a shocked expression. Jianchen gently shook his head and said, "No, big brother, my current strength should not be far from the 9th level of Saint Force. As for Saint, I estimate that I'm still some time away." Hearing this, Changyang's face showed a trace of doubt and said, "Fourth brother, since your strength hasn't reached Saint, how did you defeat Ka Diyun?" Jianchen smiled mysteriously and said, "Hee, how did I defeat Ka Diyun? Big brother, didn't you see it clearly from below the arena?" Hearing this, Changyang's face couldn't help but turn red and he stammered, that, fourth brother, actually, big brother didn't see it clearly from below the arena. Can you tell me?" Although Changyang had seen the battle between Jianchen and Ka Diyun from beginning to end, there were many things that he couldn't see through with his eyesight. For example, Jianchen's seemingly light palm strike had transformed his saint force into a strange force and sent it into Ka Diyun's body. This was something that they couldn't see through. Jianchen walked to the bed and sat down cross-legged. He calmly looked at Changyang and said, "Big brother, the reason why I was able to defeat Ka Diyun, who has already become a saint, with just 80% of my saint force, was completely because I relied on technique." Technique? Hearing this, Changyang had a doubtful look in his eyes. He wasn't unfamiliar with techniques because in the academy, the teachers would talk about techniques. This was because if two opponents of the same strength were to fight, then they would rely on powerful techniques and techniques to win. However, techniques were not so easy to learn. Even if one learned them without experiencing many battles, it was impossible to perfectly integrate the techniques into one's moves and use them reasonably. What made Changyang very puzzled was that his fourth brother, who was younger than him and had only been in the academy for a few days, actually knew a very difficult technique. He couldn't help but feel surprised. "Fourth brother, where did you learn these techniques?" Changyang's face was full of curiosity. Jianchen shook his head and said, "Big brother, I can't tell you this." Hearing this, Changyang had a regretful look on his face. However, Jianchen's next words made Changyang indescribably excited. "Big brother, if you want to learn fighting techniques, I can teach you." "Really? That's great. Fourth brother, when are you going to teach me techniques? Can you do it now?" Hearing this, Changyang was a little impatient. It seemed that he really wanted to learn it immediately and then rely on his 10th layer Saint Force strength to challenge those saints in the academy who had already condensed a saint weapon. Jianchen smiled and said, "Big brother, how about I teach you tomorrow? I'll wait for you in the small forest on the east side of the academy tomorrow morning." "Okay, fourth brother, it's a promise. We'll meet in the small forest on the east side of the academy tomorrow morning." Changyang happily agreed. Although the teachers in the academy could teach him some fighting techniques, Changyang was extremely clear that the fighting techniques taught by those teachers were not as rich as those taught by the elders in his clan. They were simply unable to be used to defeat opponents stronger than him. Afterwards, Jianchen and Changyang chatted for a while before Changyang left. As for Jianchen, he had used up too much saint force in his battle with Ka Diyun and had also suffered some light injuries. As a result, he had remained in the dormitory and relied on absorbing the energy from the Class 3 monster core to recover. Unbeknownst to them, the academy was already in an uproar. The news of Jianchen defeating Ka Diyun, who had already become a saint, with only the 8th layer of saint force, had spread through the entire academy in an extremely short amount of time. This matter shocked all the teachers and students of Kargath Academy. When they heard the news, they all felt that it was unbelievable. This was definitely an unprecedented piece of news in Kargath Academy because even if a saint didn't use a saint weapon, he could still easily defeat two people at the peak of the 10th layer of saint force, let alone a new student with only the 8th layer of saint force. News of Xianxia defeating a saint without a saint weapon with just the strength of the 8th layer of saint force quickly reached the headmaster's ears. At the top of the tall tower in the center of Kargath Academy, the dean stood in front of the window with a contemplative expression. He frowned and pondered for a moment before asking, "Bai En, is what you said true? Did Xiang really defeat Ka Dun, who had already become a saint, with just the strength of the 8th layer?" The principal's voice clearly contained some disbelief as a shrewd light flickered in his deep eyes. Vice Dean Bai En was standing behind the dean, respectfully dressed in a white robe. Hearing the dean's words, Bai En immediately replied, "Sir Dean, I've only heard about this matter from the students. As for the specifics, I'm not too sure. However, this matter has already spread like wildfire in the academy. Almost all the teachers and students know that Changyang Shoten with his 8th layer saint force has defeated Ka Dun, who has already become a saint. However, the rumor is that Ka Dun did not use a saint weapon and instead fought with Changyang Shoten barehanded." The principal stroked his long beard and lowered his head to ponder for a moment before saying, "Since the rumor is so fierce, it seems like it's most likely true. It seems like the kid that old man Chang brought this time isn't simple at all. With just the strength of the 8th level of saint force, he was able to defeat a saint. Unbelievable, truly unbelievable. Even if that saint didn't use a saint weapon and had just advanced, his strength was definitely much stronger than someone at the 10th level of saint force. I'm afraid that this is the first time since the establishment of our Kargath Academy that someone has defeated someone at a higher level than themselves. Principal, what do you think we should do about this matter? I estimate that the news of Changyang Shoten defeating a saint with his 8th layer saint force will soon spread to the ears of the older students who have been cultivating. At that time, Changyang Shoten will be in a lot of trouble." Bai En asked in a very respectful tone. From the way he looked at the dean, there was a hint of respect and admiration. Chapter 25. In the blink of an eye, 3 days had passed since the battle between Xianxia and Ka Dun. Almost everyone in Kargath Academy knew the name of Changyang Shoten. In these 3 days, other than going to the small forest on the east side of the academy to teach Changyang some fighting skills, Xianxia spent the rest of his time cultivating. Now that he had a Class 3 monster core in hand, Xianxia's cultivation speed was several times faster than before. He wanted to use this time to reach the 10th layer of Saint Force as soon as possible and then break through to the Saint Realm. After all, Xianxia was very curious about the Saint weapon condensed in the body of a saint. According to the introduction in the book, saint weapons were condensed from the saint force in the body. Once a saint weapon was condensed, the saint weapon would replace the saint force. From then on, the saint weapon would be a person's source of energy. When the saint weapon was in the body, it could act as the saint force to be used freely. And when the saint weapon was summoned, it would become the most powerful weapon. By relying on the saint weapon would be able to display a powerful attack that exceeded one's own strength. The saint weapon was the source of everyone's energy. Once the saint weapon was destroyed, not only would the person lose all their cultivation, they would also be seriously injured. In serious cases, they might even die on the spot. However, the saint weapon was very hard. Unless the difference in strength between the two was too great, the saint weapon would not be easily destroyed. Early in the morning, Xianxia, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, slowly opened his eyes and ended a night of cultivation. After 3 days of cultivation, the saint force in Xianxia's body had increased a lot. According to his estimation, his strength should have reached the 9th layer of saint force. After all, before becoming a saint, the strength of saint force had to be determined through tests. Getting off the bed, Xianxia directly left the dormitory. The sky was still gray and it was not completely bright. At this time, most of the students were still cultivating or sleeping, so the large field was very quiet. Not a single person could be seen. Only in some remote corners could one occasionally find a few students who had woken up early to practice. Passing through the field, Xianxia directly walked towards the small forest on the east side of the academy. In the past few days, Xianxia would spend some time every morning to teach his older brother about fighting. After all, Jianshan was a veteran who had roamed the world for many years in his previous life. He had encountered countless challenges, and his rich battle experience was far from what the teachers in Kargath Academy could compare with. If one really wanted to calculate, Jianshan already had the qualifications to teach the teachers in Kargath Academy. When Jianshan arrived at the small forest, he found that his older brother, Changyang, had been waiting there for a long time. At this moment, he was sitting on a tree stump and his eyes were a little listless as he looked around the forest. When Changyang saw Jianshan, he immediately became spirited and stood up from the tree stump. He happily said, "Fourth brother, you're finally here." Jianshan faintly smiled and said, "Big brother, how come you're here so early?" "Heh, I'm used to it. Fourth brother, let's start now. Yesterday morning, you talked about how to use energy. I thought about it for an entire day and still couldn't figure it out. Can you explain it to your older brother again in detail?" Changyang said a little embarrassedly. "Of course." Jianshan had a faint smile on his face and said, "Big brother, yesterday morning I told you about how to use energy. Today, I'll personally demonstrate it to you." Saying this, Jianshan picked up a small branch by his feet and held it in his hand. "Big brother, watch carefully." Saying this, Jianshan held the branch and casually waved it at a small tree that was as thick as a wrist. When the branch approached the small tree, it silently passed through the small tree without meeting any resistance, as if the small tree in front of him was originally illusory. Looking at this strange scene, just as Changyang was greatly puzzled, with a rustling sound, he saw that the small tree that was as thick as a bull's mouth began to be cut at the waist from where Jianshan's branch passed through, and the upper part directly fell down. Changyang widened his eyes, then quickly came to the front of the small tree that fell down. He saw that the small tree's cut was very smooth, as if it was directly cut by a very sharp weapon. He really couldn't imagine that this smooth cut was actually caused by a small branch that could be easily broken. Immediately, Changyang's gaze turned to the small branch in Jianshan's hand and quickly snatched it. He held it in his hand and looked at it carefully, but no matter how he looked at it, this small branch was just a very ordinary branch. When he waved it gently, the small branch swayed up and down violently. Seeing this, the doubt in Changyang's eyes grew stronger and stronger. He really couldn't understand how such an ordinary branch could cut through a small tree that was as thick as a wrist. Afterwards, Changyang's fingers slightly tightened, and with a crack, the small branch in his hand was immediately broken in two. "Fourth brother, how did you do that? How did such a weak branch cut through this small tree?" Changyang looked at Jianshan in confusion and asked curiously. Jianshan chuckled and said, "Big brother, this is actually a kind of use of Saint Force. Let alone this small branch, even a thread as thick as a needle can easily pierce through this branch. Of course, with my current strength, it's still not enough." "What? A thread as thick as an embroidery needle can penetrate this branch? Fourth brother, are you having a fever? This is simply impossible." Changyang cried out in surprise. He didn't believe Jianshan's explanation at all because he had never heard of such a thing in his entire life. In his opinion, it was simply impossible. Jianshan had a faint smile on his face the entire time. He had clearly expected Changyang's reaction, but Jianshan didn't explain too much right now. Once Changyang's strength increased in the future, he would naturally understand this principle. Jianshan picked up a slightly curved branch from the ground and said, "Big brother, weren't you very curious about how I pierced through this small tree with a small branch? Watch closely, I'll show you again." Hearing this, Changyang immediately became spirited. He stared at the small branch in Jianshan's hand with all his attention. He didn't dare to be distracted in the slightest, afraid that he would miss the slightest detail. Jianshan casually waved the small piece of paper in his hand, and then a light flashed through his eyes. He didn't seem to make any movements, but the small branch in his hand actually began to twist on its own. The originally curved branch actually began to straighten slowly. At this moment, the small branch seemed to have suddenly become alive, as if it had turned into an agile snake. The other end in Jianshan's hand was the snake's head. The snake's head slowly rose up and then slowly turned a few circles in the air. This scene was extremely strange. Seeing this extremely strange scene, Changyang, whose eyes were already wide open. His face was full of disbelief, as if he had seen a ghost. It was really hard for him to imagine that a small branch could actually twist and turn on its own. Xianxia's eyes gradually emitted a sharp light. He shouted in a low voice, "Big brother, look carefully." As soon as his voice fell, Xianxia held the small branch that had already become straight and slowly pierced forward. Not far in front of him was a small tree that was also as thick as a wrist. Xianxia's speed was not fast. Instead, it was very slow. He slowly approached the small tree. When the small branch in his hand touched the trunk of the small tree, it actually merged into the trunk silently. Then, it continued to penetrate at a very slow speed. Finally, it directly pierced through the small tree, and the small branch drilled out from the other side of the trunk. This scene stunned Changyang Hu. His eyes were fixed on the branch that had already penetrated the small tree. His mouth was already wide enough to stuff an egg, and his eyes were full of disbelief. "Fourth brother, how did you do it?" Changyang Hu's voice trembled as he asked. His heart was beating violently, but his eyes were still fixed on the small branch that was still stuck in the trunk. Xianxia smiled and said, "Big brother, it's actually not difficult to do this. As long as you fuse Saint Force into the branch, even if it's just an ordinary branch, it can become a divine weapon. If you're strong enough, you can even make the branch cut through metal like mud. Fuse Saint Force into the branch." Hearing this, Changyang Hu slightly frowned as he muttered in thought. He immediately picked up a branch from the ground and followed Xianxia's instructions. He controlled the Saint Force in his body and slowly poured it into the branch. Bang! Just as Changyang Hu's Saint Force came in contact with the branch in his hands suddenly exploded, turning into fragments that filled the air. "Big brother, your Saint Force is too strong. It's not something that this weak branch can withstand. Moreover, you're not familiar with controlling Saint Force. Remember, when you fuse Saint Force into the branch, you must turn it into a gentle force. Remember not to be too strong." Xianxia attentively taught him from the side. Hearing this, Changyang Hu's face was filled with doubt as he asked, "Fourth brother, then how do I turn Saint Force into a gentle force?" Converting Saint Force into a gentle force is only one way to use Saint Force. It's useless for me to explain the mysteries behind it. You'll have to rely on yourself to comprehend it. Big brother, from today onwards, you should try to fuse Saint Force into the branches whenever you have the time. This way, you'll be able to train your usage of Saint Force. If you can do what I'm doing, it'll be of great benefit to your cultivation in the future. Xianxia calmly said, as if he was a teacher teaching his student. However, Xianxia was extremely clear in his heart that if Changyang Hu wanted to do what he had just demonstrated, it would be impossible for him to use a weak branch to easily penetrate a small tree that was as thick as a wrist in a short amount of time. This was because the requirements for using Saint Force were extremely high. Before he could master controlling Saint Force, Changyang Hu would not be able to fuse Saint Force into the branch. This was because fusing Saint Force into a branch was extremely difficult. It was not as simple as fusing Saint Force into a weapon made of fine steel. A weapon made of fine steel was extremely tough and could withstand any kind of Saint Force, but a branch could not. Changyang Hu nodded. After a moment of thought, he picked up a branch from the ground and tried again. However, without any exception, all of his attempts ended in failure. He was unable to fuse his Saint Force into the branch at all. Every time his Saint Force approached the branch would explode from being unable to endure the Saint Force that was too powerful. Chapter 26. At this moment, the sky was already bright. When Xianxia passed by the field again, there were already quite a few students moving about. Xianxia calmly looked at the students moving about on the field as he walked towards the library. In the past 3 days, Xianxia had been cultivating his Saint Force and hadn't gone to the library. To him, the only thing in the academy that could attract Xianxia's attention was the books in the library. As for the classes taught by the teachers, Xianxia couldn't be bothered to listen to them. To him, they were just a waste of time. The things the teachers taught were mostly useless to Jianchen. Even if there were some things that could interest Jianchen, he believed that he could find them in the books in the library. After all, the Academy's library had a large collection of books that recorded almost everything on the Tianyuan continent. Hey, look, isn't that student Changyang Shoten? I heard that he defeated Ka Diyun, who has already become a saint, with just 8 layers of saint force. Yeah, I even saw student Changyang Shoten fight during the freshman competition, but it's a pity that I didn't get to see his battle with Ka Diyun. What a pity. On the field, 2 male students who saw Jianchen stood in the distance and pointed at Jianchen as they discussed in a low voice. Their gazes towards Jianchen were filled with admiration. Wow, Senior Changyang Shoten is so handsome and so powerful. He can actually defeat a saint with just 8 layers of saint force. He really is my idol. A noble girl around the same age as Jianchen with an extremely ordinary appearance stared at Jianchen with shining eyes. She exclaimed in a low voice, but her voice was filled with excitement. There were a lot of people on the field, and Jianchen's swagger was quickly noticed by more and more people. Immediately, without exception, everyone stood in the distance and looked at Jianchen as they discussed in low voices. Ever since Jianchen defeated Ka Diyun, who had already become a saint, his name had spread throughout the entire academy in just a few short hours. Now, even the teachers in the academy knew of Jianchen's name. Very soon, Jianchen passed through the field and arrived in front of a tree-lined path. This was one of the paths that led to the library. Because there weren't many people who went to the library in the academy, the tree-lined path leading to the library was very quiet. There was almost no one in sight. The path was filled with fallen leaves on both sides. As the wind blew, it rustled as countless fallen leaves danced in the air. At this moment, several figures suddenly appeared in front of Jianchen. They were talking and laughing as they walked towards Jianchen. There were 4 people in total, and they were all around the age of 10. They were all wearing the academy's uniform. Just from this, one could tell that they were all students of the academy. Jianchen paid no attention to the 4 students in front of him and continued on his path. However, just as Jianchen approached the 4 of them and was about to pass by them, the 4 of them suddenly moved together as if they had already discussed this. They surrounded Jianchen from 4 directions. Jianchen stopped and calmly looked at the 4 students who were slightly older than him. He sneered, "Seniors, may I ask what the meaning of this is?" Although the 4 of them were wearing the academy's uniform, it was still unable to hide the arrogance on their faces. "Kid, you look quite unfamiliar. You must be new," the person facing Jianchen sneered as he glared at Jianchen. Jianchen was calm as his eyes met the person who spoke. He smiled, "That's right. I am indeed new. May I ask what advice you seniors have for me?" With that, the young man chuckled, "If you want to properly stay in the academy, you can't do so without our protection. However, if you want our protection, you have to pay a certain fee. Since you're new, we'll charge you 10 purple coins. How about it? It's worth it, right?" The young man had a confident smile on his face. In his heart, he believed that he already had Jianchen under control. This was because from his point of view, he could determine that Jianchen's strength wasn't very strong from Jianchen's thin and weak body. This was because he had done this many times in the academy and could be said to be very experienced. If he encountered a student with a strong body, he might consider it. However, for someone as thin and weak as Jianchen, he didn't even need to consider it. In the past, when he collected protection fees from students as thin and weak as Jianchen, it was a 100% success rate. There was no resistance at all. If Jianchen was a commoner, the 4 of them definitely wouldn't dare to collect protection fees from Jianchen unless they didn't want to stay in the academy anymore. After all the seniors in Kargath knew that the dean was very biased towards commoner students. And the 4 of them had stayed in the academy for a long time. They could recognize the commoner students at a glance. So when they saw Jianchen for the first time, they knew that Jianchen was definitely not a commoner. This was why they dared to collect protection fees from him. After hearing the young man's words, Jianchen sneered in his heart. He didn't expect that the young man was actually here to collect protection fees. "Seniors, I'm very sorry. I refuse your protection." Jianchen's tone was very calm. After he finished speaking, he didn't wait for the others to reply. He directly used his shoulder to push the young man in front of him away and continued to walk towards the library. Xianxia's action made the four young men stunned. Obviously, this situation was out of their expectations. They didn't expect that Xianxia, who they thought was already in the bag, would actually refuse their protection so straightforwardly. The four of them quickly reacted. Staring at Xianxia, who had already walked out of their encirclement, the four young men's eyes flashed with a trace of fierceness. And the young man who was pushed away by Xianxia's shoulder had a very ugly expression on his face. "Damn it, brat, you stop right there." The young man who was pushed away by Xianxia shouted angrily. He quickly ran towards Xianxia and blocked him in front of him again. Then, the other three young men quickly came to Xianxia's side and surrounded Xianxia again. "You actually just bumped into me. You're really tired of living." The young man who felt that he had lost all face angrily shouted in a low voice. Then he directly slapped towards Xianxia's face. Looking at the young man's palm that was about to slap his face, Xianxia's calm and ordinary eyes instantly became fierce. A cold light flashed in his eyes. Then he quickly raised his right hand and reached out with lightning speed that the young man couldn't react to. Halfway through, he steadily borrowed the young man's palm. Then, Xianxia quickly kicked out and directly hit the young man's chest. Following a muffled sound, the young man was directly sent flying by Xianxia's powerful kick. Then, he fell heavily on the ground without any care for his image. The sudden, unforeseen event made the three young men surrounding Xianxia stunned for a moment. No one would have thought that a freshman who was easy to bully in their eyes would suddenly become so powerful. Before they could react, one of their companions was directly sent flying by a kick. However, they quickly regained their senses. Almost at the same time, their faces were filled with killing intent. Then, without any reason, as if they had discussed beforehand, the three of them actually attacked Xianxia at the same time. Although they knew that Xianxia's strength wasn't ordinary, the four of them were used to running amok in Kargath Academy. They didn't fear Xianxia at all. Even if Xianxia's strength was so strong that even the four of them together couldn't contend against him, they still didn't fear him. This wasn't only because each of them had a huge family behind them, but more importantly, they had a solid backing in Kargath Academy. Feeling the Saint force released by the three of them was even stronger than his own, Xianxia's face showed a trace of disdain. From the moment the three of them attacked, he could determine their strength from the Saint force they released. They were roughly at the 10th layer of Saint force. The speed of the three of them was extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they were already in front of Xianxia. However, at this crucial moment, Xianxia's body slightly swayed and instantly escaped from their attack range with a speed faster than their fists. The three of them missed at the same time. However, before they could retract their fists, Xianxia's fist had already arrived at the head of one of them. The speed of the fist was so fast that the three of them didn't have time to react. Bang! Following a muffled sound, the young man who was hit in the head by Xianxia was directly knocked unconscious and fell to the ground. At the same time, Xianxia's right leg quickly kicked out. Before the other two could react, it viciously kicked one of them in the chest. Following a muffled sound, the young man was already prepared, so he only staggered a few steps back after receiving Xianxia's kick. He quickly stabilized his body, but even so, his face was still pale. This was because the two great forces from Xianxia's kick had shaken his internal organs a little. Furthermore, traces of weak Saint force had also entered his body through Xianxia's foot, destroying his internal organs. Just as the young man regained his footing, Xianxia's second kick had already been sent out. It brought about a series of afterimages in the air and once again kicked the young man's chest. The two footprints perfectly overlapped. This time, Xianxia's kick had actually landed precisely on the same spot. Receiving two consecutive heavy blows in the same spot, the young man's injuries were not as simple as 1 + 1 = 2. When Xianxia's second kick landed on his chest, even though he had the strength of the 10th layer of Saint force, he was still severely injured. Intense pain came from his internal organs. For a moment, the young man's face turned pale. His internal chi was blocked, making it difficult for him to breathe. He staggered a few steps back and finally lost his footing, falling to the ground and unable to get up again. Seeing Jianshan defeat his companion in the blink of an eye, the remaining young man's face could not help but change. Just as he was about to charge at Jianshan, he suddenly stopped. His feet were deeply rooted to the ground, and he did not dare to take a single step forward. His eyes were filled with vigilance as he stared at Jianshan. His expression was no longer as calm as before, but solemn. Jianshan looked at him indifferently. The corner of his mouth curled into a cold smile. Without saying anything, he turned around and left, heading towards the library. After Jianshan left, the two young men who had been beaten to the ground by Jianshan climbed up from the ground in a sorry state. Their eyes were filled with hatred as they stared at Jianshan's back. One of them said in a deep voice, "Who is he? He's actually so strong that even we are not his opponent. Is he really a new student who just entered the school this year? How can he be so strong?" Chapter 27. At this moment, the young man who had luckily escaped arrived before the two of them. Looking at the pale-faced young man who had been kicked twice by Jianshan, he asked in concern, "Luo Yun, are you all right?" The young man called Luo Yun shook his head slightly and said weakly, "It's not a big problem. I'll be fine after a few days of rest." He then changed his tone and looked at the uninjured young man. "Carl, you're more well-informed in the academy. Find out who that person is as soon as possible and get young Master Chung to deal with him." The young man called Carl pondered for a moment before replying, "There's no need to investigate. I might already know who he is." The other two beamed with joy. Luo Yun said, "That's great. Carl, who is that person?" "Among the new students this year, there's one person who's especially powerful. He defeated Ka Diyun, who had condensed a saint weapon and become a saint, with just the strength of the 8th layer of saint force. He might be that person." Carl's voice was rather heavy. Carl's words made their expressions change slightly. They looked at each other before Luo Yun said softly, "Could he be Changyang Shoten?" Carl nodded, "It's very possible. Among the new students this year, probably only Changyang Shoten can defeat us. If that person really is Changyang Shoten, it makes sense that we wouldn't be his opponent. After all, he was able to defeat Ka Diyun, who had already become a saint. Even though Ka Diyun didn't use a saint weapon, it's enough to prove that Changyang Shoten is powerful." So what if he's Changyang Shoten? Since he's offended us, we definitely won't let him have an easy time in the academy," said the young man who had been attacked by Jianshan the first time. A cold smile appeared on Luo Yun's pale face as he said in a low voice, "Coincidentally, our Luo family's eldest young master has been looking everywhere for news about Changyang Shoten. I reckon that he's interested in Changyang Shoten. It's a pity that we don't know where Changyang Shoten has been hiding for the past few days. We couldn't find him even after searching for a few days. I didn't expect to meet him here today. Luo Yun, go find your Luo family's eldest young master. Chen Feng and I will call young Master Cheng out. I don't believe that Changyang Shoten is a match for young Master Cheng," Carl said in a low voice. "All right, we'll go our separate ways. However, I think it would be better to leave someone behind to keep an eye on Changyang Shoten. The academy is so big. If Changyang Shoten hides somewhere and refuses to come out, how are we going to find him?" Luo Yun suggested. Carl nodded. He then turned his gaze to the young man beside him and said, "Chen Feng, you stay behind and secretly follow Changyang Shoten. I'll go get young Master Cheng." "No problem." The young man called Chen Feng agreed without any hesitation. After the three of them finished their work, Chen Feng followed the direction that Jianshan had left in while the other two carried the unconscious young man on the ground and quickly left. In the library, Jianshan picked 2 books from the bookshelves before sitting down at a table and reading them with great interest. Perhaps it was because it was too early, but the library was very quiet. Other than Jianshan, there was only a middle-aged woman who was busy cleaning the library. The middle-aged woman seemed to be in her 40s. She had an ordinary appearance and belonged to the general population. Due to her lack of talent in cultivation, her saint force was only at the 6th layer even though she was already in her 40s. Even Kargas and the other new students were stronger than her. The middle-aged woman raised her head and looked at Jianshan, who was engrossed in reading. Although she did not know Jianshan's name, she had a very deep impression of him. This was because other than the past 3 days, Jianshan was the first student to come to the library every morning. Moreover, he would often read for an entire day. Sometimes, he would even skip lunch. She had been cleaning the library in the academy for several years now. Jianshan was the first student she had met who was so hardworking. What a hardworking child. The middle-aged woman let out a soft sigh. She then ignored Jianshan and continued with her work. In a spacious stone house, a young man in his 20s stood in the middle of the stone house with his eyes closed. His body was in a very strange posture, as if he was a piece of wood standing there, motionless. Dong dong dong. At this moment, a dull knocking sound came from the outside. At the same time, the young man's closed eyes slowly opened. He turned his head slightly, still maintaining that strange posture as he looked in the direction of the door. He said in a low voice, "Who is it?" "Young master, it's me, Luo Yun." A soft voice came from outside the door. "Come in," the young man said calmly. The door opened and a young man around 20 years old wearing a school uniform walked in. This person was one of the 4 people who had a conflict with Jianshan. His name was Luo Yun. Luo Yun looked at the young man who was sitting in a strange posture. He did not feel the slightest bit surprised, as if it was a common occurrence. This was because the young man's strange posture was their Luo family's cultivation method. In the Tianyuan continent, there were countless secret manuals and methods of cultivation. Among them, not only did meditation cultivate, there were also many people who relied on some kind of movement or special posture to cultivate. The Luo family's cultivation method was obviously the latter. They used their body to make some special posture to cultivate. Luo Yun came before the young man and bowed slightly. He said respectfully, "Young master, haven't you been looking for Changyang Shoten's whereabouts all this time? Just now, I happened to find Changyang Shoten." Although Luo Yun's family was considered to have a high status in the Luo family, he did not dare to show the slightest bit of impudence in front of this young man. This young man was the only son of the Luo family's current patriarch, Luo Jian. He was deeply doted on by the patriarch and had already been decided as the future successor of the Luo family. Luo Yun only had the intention to curry favor with Luo Jian. "I found Changyang Shoten." Hearing this, Luo Jian's eyes lit up. He glanced at Luo Yun's pale face and casually shifted his gaze downwards, landing on the faint footprint on Luo Yun's chest. He said arrogantly, "Looking at how miserable you are, you must have suffered quite a bit at the hands of Changyang Shoten." Luo Jian furrowed his brows and said in a deep voice, "Stop hemming and hawing. What did Changyang Shoten say about me?" Luo Yun's eyes were red as they flickered. He hesitated for a moment, then as if he had gathered enough courage, he said in a low voice, "Changyang Shoten said that you're nothing. You're not even qualified to carry his shoes." "What?" Luo Jian's face suddenly changed when he heard this. He immediately became furious. Although the Luo clan was not a peak clan that had stood on the Tianyuan continent for over 1,000 years, it was still one of the largest clans in the kingdom of Jessen. It had a history of over 200 years. Even with the entire kingdom of Jessen in perspective, there were only a handful of clans that were more powerful than the Luo clan. As the future successor of the Luo clan, Luo Jian's status was extremely noble. Even the princess and the crown prince of the kingdom were on equal footing with him. He had never thought that an unknown new student in Kargath Academy would actually dare to speak such arrogant words. How could Luo Jian, who had been proud since he was young, swallow this anger? Luo Jian stared sharply at Luo Yun and said in a low voice, "He really said that?" Luo Jian's voice was filled with unconcealable anger. Seeing Luo Jian's reaction, Luo Yun's eyes flashed with a trace of joy. However, he was quickly stunned by Luo Jian's reaction. He hurriedly said, "Yes, young master. Luo Yun's words are all true. I don't dare to have the slightest intention of offending you. This Changyang Shoten has really gone too far. He doesn't even respect you, young master. Moreover, he has arrogantly insulted you. If you don't properly teach him a lesson, Where will you put your face in the future? I'm afraid you'll become a laughingstock in the academy. Hearing Luo Yun's words, Luo Jian's face gradually darkened. He then slowly stood up and said in a low voice, "Where is Changyang Shoten? Lead the way. Since he doesn't respect me, I'd like to see just how capable he is." "Young master, please follow me." After saying that, Luo Yun walked out of the stone house and led the gloomy Luo Jian towards the direction of the library. At the same time, in another direction of the Kargath Academy, Carl, who had just left, was respectfully leading a few arrogant young men around the age of 20 towards the library. When the few of them passed by the field, some of the older students recognized them and their expressions changed. Soon after, whispers of discussion could be heard from all directions. "Isn't the person in the middle young Master Ching? He hasn't walked around the academy for a year. What kind of wind blew him out today?" A 20-year-old senior stared at the few young men not far away and muttered in a low voice. His tone was filled with surprise. "I heard that young Master Cheng had already reached the strength of an intermediate saint a year ago. I wonder how strong young Master Cheng is now." Young Master Cheng is a publicly acknowledged genius in our Kargath Academy. He condensed a saint weapon at the age of 19 and became a saint. He reached the strength of an intermediate saint at the age of 20. Now that a year has passed, with young Master Cheng's talent, he should have already reached the strength of a high-level saint. Yeah, young Master Cheng is the person with the fastest cultivation speed in our Kargath Academy. I heard that the principal once said that young Master Cheng will definitely reach the strength of a great saint before the age of 23. Reaching the strength of a great saint at the age of 23, young Master Cheng is really amazing. There are many older students in the academy who are still stuck at the peak of the 10th layer of Saint Force at his age. As Carl's group slowly passed by the field, the older students they met along the way discussed in low voices. Young Master Cheng was an extremely famous person in Kargath Academy. It wasn't because of his character, but because of his astonishing cultivation speed. Even on the Tianyuan continent, he could be called a genius. Among the students of Kargath Academy, young Master Cheng's strength was already at the peak. Chapter 28. Very soon, Luo Yun brought Luo Jian to the entrance of the library. Not far from the entrance, Chen Feng, who was tailing Jian Chen, was leaning against a small tree. From time to time, he would glance at Jian Chen, who was engrossed in reading the books in the library, as if he had completely entered a state of selflessness. When Chen Feng saw Luo Yun and Luo Jian, he immediately ran over and bowed slightly to Luo Jian. With a flattering smile on his face, he said, "I didn't think that I would meet young Master Luo here. It's really an honor for me to meet you here." Chen Feng's attitude was quite respectful. Although his family was still a noble, it was only a small noble in the kingdom of Jessen. In the academy, he only dared to collect protection fees by mingling with the children of the big families. At this moment, if he could make use of Changyang Shoten's matter to establish a relationship with the young master of the Luo family, it would be very beneficial for him in the future. Even his family would be able to climb up a big tree because of this. After all, Luo Jian was the future successor of the Luo family. Luo Jian arrogantly looked at Chen Feng, who was being respectful towards him. He impatiently waved his hand and said, "Don't talk so much nonsense. Is Changyang Shoten in the library right now?" Hearing Luo Jian's rude words, Chen Feng's face didn't reveal the slightest trace of anger. His face was still full of smiles as he said, Yes, Changyang Shoten has always been in the library." Hearing this, Luo Jian's face gradually revealed a trace of a cold smile as he said, "Good, then you go and call Changyang Shoten out for me." The prohibition of all fighting in the library was set by the headmasters of the academy. Even if Luo Jian had a strong family behind him, he still wouldn't dare to casually break the rules of the academy. "Yes, young Master Luo. I will go and call Changyang Shoten out." After saying that, Chen Feng immediately ran towards the library. Within the library, Jian Chen's attention was completely focused on the books. He had already lowered his vigilance to the lowest level. After all, this was Kargath Academy. There was no need to worry about safety at all. There was no need to be vigilant at all times. Just as Jianxin was engrossed in reading the book, he suddenly felt someone pat his shoulder. When he reluctantly looked away from the book, he saw a young man standing beside him, looking at him with a cold smile. With Jianxin's photographic memory, he immediately recognized this young man as one of the 4 people who had stopped him on the road to collect protection fees. Chen Feng stood beside Jianxin and looked at Jianxin with eyes full of schadenfreude. He said in a very strange tone, "Changyang Shoten, you didn't expect us to meet again so soon, did you?" "It's you." Jianxin slightly frowned and said in a low voice without giving face, "If you are here to collect protection fees, then you can get out of here." Hearing this, Chen Feng's eyes flashed with anger. However, he didn't dare to make a move against Jianxin. Not to mention that the library was an important place in the academy where fighting was prohibited, he also understood that he wasn't Jianxin's opponent. Chen Feng's chest violently heaved up and down. He stared fiercely at Jianxin and said in a cold voice, "Changyang Shoten, although I am not your opponent, Kargath Academy is not a place where you can be arrogant. If you have the guts, then come out with me. Otherwise, you can prepare to stay in the library for the rest of your life." After saying this, Chen Feng directly walked out of the library. However, his arrival and the words he said attracted the attention of everyone in the library. Immediately, many people looked at Jianxin with curiosity, envy, worship, jealousy, and other complicated gazes. Jianxin slowly closed the book and frowned slightly. From Chen Feng's words, he understood that they had found a helper to deal with him. Jianxin's eyes flashed. He lowered his head and thought for a while. Then, he slowly closed the book and took the book to the front of the bookshelf. After putting the book back in its original position, he walked out. Now that there were people waiting for him outside, if he didn't go, then it would seem that he was afraid of them. Moreover, in order for him to be able to quietly read books in the future, in order for him to be able to live a peaceful life in Kargath Academy, he had to display a strength that would make others fear him. Otherwise, if any random cat or dog came to find trouble with him, then he wouldn't need to come to the library to read books. Although Jianxin knew that the people outside were definitely not weak and were likely to be experts at the same level as Kadyun, he wasn't afraid at all. He was confident that with his current strength, even if he couldn't win against a saint, he definitely wouldn't lose easily. After all, no matter if it was his fighting experience or skills, they were far from what a student in the academy could compare to. Moreover, he was someone who had experienced many life and death situations. As soon as Jianxin walked out of the library, he raised his head and saw 3 youths standing outside the library. The 3 of them were about the same age and were all wearing the academy's uniform. 2 of them were the ones who had asked Jianxin for protection fees. As for the other person, Jianxin could tell from the arrogant expression on his face that he was the helper they had found. Seeing that Jianxin had really walked out of the library, Luo Yun revealed a sinister smile. He then whispered to Luo Jian, who was standing beside him, "Young master, he's Changyang Shoten." Luo Jian arrogantly sized up Jianxin. His eyes were filled with disdain as he coldly said, "Boy, you're Changyang Shoten." Jianxin looked at Luo Jian indifferently. Luo Jian looked to be about 22 or 23 years old. He was very handsome, but his expression was filled with undisguised arrogance. "And who are you?" Jianxin looked at Luo Jian indifferently and asked coldly. As soon as Jianxin finished speaking, Luo Yun, who was standing beside Luo Jian, shouted, "How dare you, Changyang Shoten? Who do you think you are? You actually dare to use this kind of tone to speak to my young master. Do you not want to stay in the academy anymore?" Changyang Shoten quickly apologized to young Master Luo. "Otherwise, don't even think about staying in Kargath Academy." Chen Feng didn't want to miss such a good opportunity to curry favor with Luo Jian, so he angrily shouted at Jianxin. Hearing the words of the 2, Luo family's young master Luo Jian's expression became even more arrogant. His face was filled with pride. Jianxin's indifferent face gradually revealed a trace of a sneer. He looked at the 3 people in front of him with eyes filled with disdain and said, "From the meaning of your words, could it be that the Dean of Kargath Academy will listen to the orders of the 3 of you? Or perhaps, This Kargath Academy is run by your family. Whoever you want to leave must leave. The three of you are really daring to actually not put the dean in your eyes." Hearing Jianshan's words, Luo Yun and Chen Feng's complexions suddenly changed and became a little pale. Not only the two of them, but even Luo Jian's face became very ugly after hearing Jianshan's words. He looked at Jianshan with eyes full of resentment. Although the three of them had a certain amount of power behind them, and Luo Jian was the future successor of the Luo family, one of the top two families in the Jessan Empire, they still didn't dare to show the slightest disrespect to the Dean of Kargath Academy. If Jianshan's words were to reach the Dean's ears, then they would receive a very serious punishment. If the situation was serious, they might even be expelled from the academy. Even if Luo Jian had a great background, even if his father was the Luo family, even if Luo Jian was the future successor of the Luo family, it would still be useless. Their Luo family would absolutely not offend the Dean of Kargath Academy for him. Luo Jian's face was gloomy. He stared at Jianshan with a sharp gaze and said, "Chengyang Shoten, you really are very arrogant. But I don't know if you have the qualifications to be arrogant." Jianshan smiled disdainfully and coldly said, "Less nonsense. Tell me your intentions." A cold smile appeared on Luo Jian's face. His voice was full of murderous intent as he said, "My intentions are very simple. I just want to meet you. I want to see how strong Chengyang Shoten is after defeating a newly promoted saint without using his saint weapon Cardi Cloud." After saying that, Luo Jian rubbed his fists and slowly stepped forward. As he clenched his fists, a clear sound of bones cracking could be heard. At the same time, a strong pressure was emitted from Luo Jian's body, directly oppressing Jianshan. At this moment, in the library behind him, some of the students who had been reading put down the books in their hands and gathered at the entrance of the library. They were all watching Jianshan and the others talk in low voices with great interest. They were completely watching this scene with the mentality of watching a show. Jianshan was unmoved by Luo Jian's qi. He stood in place like a towering mountain. Jianshan was very clear about Luo Jian's strength. He was definitely much stronger than Cardi Cloud. However, Jianshan was not afraid at all. Instead, his fighting spirit was high. Seeing that the two sides were about to fight, some of the people in the library behind him immediately retreated far away, for fear of being affected. How can we miss out on such a wonderful fight? Just as the two were about to fight, a sudden voice came from behind. As soon as the voice fell, several young men in school uniforms walked over from behind. There were a total of 5 people. Except for one of them whom Jianshan recognized as one of the 4 people who had collected protection fees from him, he did not know any of the other 4. However, he could tell at a glance that these 4 people were from big families. There was always a look of superiority between their brows. However, the young man standing in the middle of the 5 people attracted Jianshan's attention. With his eyesight, he could see at a glance that this young man seemed to be surrounded by the other 4 people. This young man was not very old. Judging from his appearance, he looked to be in his 20s. Look, isn't that young Master Cheng who hasn't appeared for a year? I didn't expect him to come. Yes, that's young Master Cheng. He is a genius of our Kargath Academy. It is said that his strength had reached the intermediate stage of the Saint Realm a year ago. With his cultivation talent, I thought young Master Cheng had broken through the Saint Realm to become a great saint and graduated. I didn't expect him to still stay in the academy. I just don't know what young Master Cheng's strength has reached now. Has he reached the Great Saint Realm? The 3 people standing next to young Master Cheng seemed to have condensed a holy weapon. I didn't expect that the academy's rarely seen experts would come here. As soon as they saw the young man in the middle, the students standing in the library suddenly exclaimed in a low voice and began to talk. Welcome to Legends of Cultivation, audiobooks, where we bring ancient fantasy to life through storytelling. Follow the rise of heroes who defy fate, unlock mystical powers, and battle across celestial realms. Our audiobooks are crafted for fans of Chinese cultivation novels, filled with battles, breakthroughs, and legendary artifacts. Subscribe and be part of an unforgettable journey into the realm of immortality.